Welcome to another video for photosynthesis, the biology class. In this video, we're going to be getting into the nitty-gritty details of where the energy that the leaf has attained, where it stores it. So in the previous video for photosystem 1 or photosystem 2 and photosystem 1, you've read, and you've learned that the leaf absorbs the energy from the sun, the photon. It bounces it around from photosystem 2 to photosystem 1. It bounces it around via an electron that absorbs that energy. Okay? And that energy gets stored into a molecule called ATP and NADPH. So what happens to that energy, right? So that's the light dependent reaction. Now we're in the dark dependent reaction. Okay, no light is required here. And the reason why no light is required here is because the energy that's used for this part of the process has already been gotten from light in photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. So let's go ahead and get started. What happens to the energy that is absorbed from the sun? What happens to it? Where does it go? Okay, so we mentioned before that a plant requires three things. It needs water, it needs carbon dioxide, and it needs sunlight. We already know what happens to the sunlight. Now, what happens to the carbon dioxide that's absorbed? So you see up here a carbon molecule at the top. There's three, and we're only going to be discussing one cycle. So if it was two cycles, then it would multiply that number 3 by 2. Okay? But this is only one cycle, so that means there's 3 carbon atoms that we're discussing here, or 3 carbon dioxide atoms. So the plant absorbs carbon dioxide, okay, and it goes into what's called the Calvin cycle. Okay, so the red arrow indicating the direction that we're going in this cycle. Now, to get us started, we need a couple of other molecules. We need an enzyme called rubisco. Okay, that's an enzyme. And then we need another big molecule called ribulose biphosphate. Okay, ribulose meaning it's a sugar, biphosphate meaning it has 2 phosphate groups on either end. Okay, so these three things, carbon, the carbon dioxide coming from the air outside going into the plant, and then you have the RUBP molecule, ribulose biphosphate. Now this ribulose biphosphate and the carbon molecule will be combined by the rubisco enzyme, and it's going to combine it. Okay, so here comes the rubisco and here comes ribulose biphosphate. Okay, and this combination is called carbon fixation. So it fixates the top carbon, the carbon dioxide coming from the atmosphere, it fixates it into the ribulose biphosphate to make a new molecule. And this is a very short-lived intermediate molecule, so we won't get too much into it, but you'll notice that now it has 6 carbon atoms, and you still have the biphosphates on either end. Okay, so now, again, this is a very short-lived intermediate molecule, so I'm not going to give you the name, so you don't have to worry about this name, but you do need to remember your biphosphate molecule on the previous step. All right, so, and we have 3 of these molecules, okay? So you'll see there on the left, you have 3, that means there's 3 molecules. And you'll see on the top right, we have an ATP molecule. These ATP molecules, and there's 6 of them, these ATP molecules are coming from our light-dependent reactions from the previous video. So this is where the energy now is being stored. So that ATP molecule, that adenosine triphosphate molecule, is very unstable, okay? And it has the energy from the sun, and now it's going to bring it into the Calvin cycle, okay? So ATP comes in, and we have a very strong reaction where the energy from the ATP is now being absorbed by this molecule, and that energy causes such an instability that this molecule, okay, the energy is absorbed and the molecule breaks apart into 2 molecules, okay? And this molecule is called 3-phosphoglycerate, okay? Meaning that that phosphate group, the yellow is attached to carbon number 3, okay? So that's 3-phosphoglycerate. Okay, and then of course the ATP turns into, you see on the bottom there, ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and there's 6 of them, right? Because in my previous we have 6 ATP and it turns into ADP. So now that energy is being absorbed by the molecule, and now it's stored in this molecule called 3-phosphoglycerate. Again, and it's 3 because the phosphate is attached to the number 3 carbon. This should actually be flipped around to match the one on the right. Okay, so, and then we have our 6 ADP. Now these ADP molecules are now going to go back to light-dependent reactions, and they're going to go back to the photosystem 2 and 1 to absorb more energy from the sun. Okay, so they go back into the cycle. All right, so, and remember, there's originally 3, and it broke apart, so now there's 6. Yes? All right, let's move on. Now, the next step, you have another phosphate that gets attached to this, to our 3-phosphoglycerate. Okay, so you have 2 phosphates on each end now. That's called 1,3-biphosphoglycerate, and it's 1,3 because the phosphate is attached to carbon 1 and carbon 3. All right? Okay, so that's our next molecule. Now, so we have this molecule that has energy stored inside of it, right? Do you remember where that energy came from? Okay, remember it came from the ATP from a previous couple of steps. But there's still more energy to be absorbed in this system. And that energy comes from the molecule you see at the top right called NADPH. And remember, this NADPH molecule comes from photosystem 1, back in the light-dependent reactions. So that energy that's stored from the sunlight is now coming in from NADPH, and it's going to pass that energy on to this molecule. Okay? So it absorbed the energy, the phosphate group breaks off, and then NADP pH turns into NADP plus. Okay? And that's because the hydrogen that was attached to that molecule, NADPH, that hydrogen, that H, it broke off. Okay? So the energy now has been transferred to this molecule right here, and there's 6 of them. Okay? And this molecule is really important because now it has the energy from the ATP and the energy from the NADPH, right? This molecule, for short, you can call it G3P, or glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Okay? It's a mouthful, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. But again, you can just remember it as G3P. Okay, G for glyceraldehyde, 3 for it's on a number 3 carbon, and then the phosphate because there's a phosphate attached to it. And there's 6 of them. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, big 6. Now, this is where it gets interesting because 5 of these molecules that have all of this energy continue on. These 5 of these G3P molecules continue on into the process of the Calvin cycle, and only one of them breaks off, and it breaks off that carbon molecule, that high energy molecule, becomes a building block of the plant. So this is how plants actually get bigger. They grow in size because these carbon molecules in the Calvin cycle, they will break off, okay? They will break off and become a block, if you will, or a brick in the actual plant itself, and the plant just continues to grow. Okay, so we have so the rest, the 5 G3Ps will continue on in the Calvin cycle. Okay, they continue on, and look what's coming up next. More ATP molecules. So these ATP molecules will come to the our G3P, and then that G3P absorbs that ATP molecule, and it rearranges into, do you remember this guy? Ribulose biphosphate, right? Ribulose biphosphate continues on into the cycle, and our ADP goes back into the light-dependent reactions in photosystem 2 and 1. Ribulose biphosphate meets up with our old friend Rubisco and carbon. And then, if you remember back to step number 1, carbon dioxide comes in, ribulose biphosphate are combined by the enzyme Rubisco, carbon fixation, right? And we continue on with our process, right? And this just continues. It goes over and over and over all day, every day. Well, actually, not all day, because remember, Step 1 requires light. So this process does not continue during the nighttime. Your plants kind of take a rest at night because there's no light. So photosynthesis doesn't occur. All right, so next you have an overview or an overview, a summary of what we've just discussed. These are the main ideas that I want you to know in the Calvin cycle. Okay, these are dark dependent reactions. They don't need light, and these are the main highlight points that I want you to remember. These are the molecules that I want you to remember. So I'll print this out for you so you can have it in class. Good luck with your studying.